Okay, so I am on part 2 of The Way of Kings. I have not finished part 2 because it's a really long part. So I'm up to chapter 18, just about to start it. So just finished chapter 17, page 330. But the thing is, so much has happened and I had so many notes that I had to talk about it before reading the rest of part 2. So here we go. So we started off with 3 interludes, and we had Ishikk, we had Nan Balat, and then we went back to Szeth as well. So let's talk about Ishikk first. It's not a very long chapter, but we get 3 people who are looking for Hoid. They're looking for Drifter. We get a description of Hoid having an arrow-shaped face. I don't know if that is what he looks like in all the books, so I can't remember all the descriptions of him other than he has white hair nearly always. But I'm definitely going to be looking out for those with arrow-shaped faces. But what's interesting is that somebody on this planet or world knows who Hoid is, which has much wider implications for the universe, but more importantly, is pretty convinced that Hoid is on this planet, Drifter's on this planet. So obviously I'm going to keep an eye out for this person now. Then we jump over to Nan Balat. And Nan Balat, Nan Balat is Shalorn, and a lot of people corrected me on her pronunciation. I believe it's Shalorn, but I'm sure someone will tell me if I'm still getting it wrong. Her brother. So Nan Balat has been left behind in their homeland to hold down the fort, and he seems like a very disturbed human being. We see him murdering small animals, which is definitely a serial killer trait. And it makes me think that maybe there is a much more nefarious reason for Shalorn leaving. We already know that she has capabilities to use a sharp blade because she had used one previously. We already know that she, I believe, was standing over a battered Nan Balat, so maybe it was her who battered down, her brother. And we know her father is dead, and we know her brother is missing, and her father wasn't the nicest person in the world, and they were using illegal soulcasters. Like, there's so much that we still need to find out, and I talked about this at length in the previous video, so I don't want to keep going over it, but that storyline is definitely becoming my probably the most interesting one, because of how little we know about it and how juicy the details are that we know so far. And I was starting to think, did she maybe kill her own father? Possibly. Maybe she discovered what it was they were actually doing, and she decided that that was enough and it was time for him to die. And now she needs to figure out a way to rescue things. But obviously her brother is going to make things really difficult for her because he sounds like a real piece of work. So there's that option. The other option is actually she's fully committed to whatever the family business is, and it's not good, or was, and she is now out there to try and further their aims. And I can't decide which would be a more exciting storyline to follow. The idea that this girl that I actually really like, Shalorn, is actually probably quite a dark and twisted character. That would be a really interesting storyline for me to follow, and how she interacts with everybody else. But I mean, either way, I don't have a prediction yet, but I just know that it's for sure going to be extremely interesting, and I can't wait for us to circle back around and find out more about what was happening, what is happening, and what will happen with her family, and whatever it is they do. And then we jump back to Szeth. Szeth is a strange character. He seems to be very subservient, and he allows people to be like his master, or tell him what to do. The one thing we do know is that he has the black gem that he took from Gavilar, or that Gavilar gave to him even. And when he was dying, I can't remember if he took it or Gavilar gave it to him. Either way, he has it and he's holding on to it. And I was trying to spitball some ideas based on what I know already about the world. The only idea that I came up with that was kind of interesting was, it's clear that this is probably a one-time deal, like this gem that he has, this treasure that he has. Otherwise, Gavilar wouldn't keep it on his person. And we know soul casting is extremely powerful, and that's really where all resources, that is the deciding resource in power in this world, it would seem, is someone being able to have enough resources to soulcast. So maybe this is a soulcaster that has unlimited energy, or maybe it is something completely different, but that's the only thing I could think of there. as to what that gem might do. So we'll see. And it looks like Szeth will work his way to any of our characters. His storyline is pretty wide open, but I am very much hoping he works his way to Kaladin. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, because I think they have a lot to talk about. So we join our big players and we find the prince that was promised. And I was right. It was the almighty Sen from the flashback who is actually the prince who was promised. Ah, what a guess that was. Actually, no, of course it was Dalinar. We join him, we join the new king whose name is Elhokhar, and someone will correct me on that one. Szeth, and then Dalinar's 2 children as well, his boys. And it's very interesting dynamics, and we learn a lot more about the power structure with regards to who's running the show, or would seem like who's running the show on this side of things. So first, let's talk about Dalinar. He is a very interesting character. The first thing I want to say is he appears to have somebody whispering to him. And where I've seen this before is in the Mistborn trilogy with Ruin. Ruin had the ability to whisper to those who, this is a big spoiler if you haven't read these books, by the way, so yeah, just warning you. But Ruin had the ability to whisper to anybody who had been touched by a hemorrhagic spike, I think it was. And that's why he was whispering to Vin throughout. So maybe this is a shard whispering to Dalinar. And it feels like it's the opposing force of whatever forced the assassination of his brother in the first place, because he keeps whispering to unite them together. And I already predicted that I feel like if there's only 2 shards, I don't know, maybe there's more. This feels like a much longer series, so if there was more shards, that would definitely make sense. But this feels like if there is only 2 shards, this is like the back and forth. So maybe one of the shards engineered the assassination of Gavilar so that, like I mentioned in the previous video, everyone wouldn't be united in preparation for the Everstorm. Whereas this one is talking about unite them to bring everybody together. And I think this one believes that their best chances with Dalinar, and they're trying to get that done through him because he has a ton of influence, he has a great skill set. So yeah, that's my prediction on the voice, which isn't really a prediction, it's me just taking what happened in Mistborn and applying it to this, but I feel like that's a decent guess. Also, Dalinar's blade is called Oathbringer. Right at the start, we saw 9 people renegade on their oath. Coincidence? I think not. And Blackthorn in action is phenomenal. And this is something I wanted. I remember right at the start in the assassination scene, and we had the scene from Szeth's perspective. This time round, we got a fighting scene from somebody who's wearing the shard plate with a shard blade. And yeah, it was awesome. I thought it was incredible. He's clearly extremely skilled. And one thing I do know is the guilt must weigh heavy on his shoulders because of his brother's death. Because if him and Gavilar had been together, I don't think Szeth would have succeeded, because Gavilar landed like some decent shots and gave him a run for his money anyway. And the Blackthorn seems to be at least as capable as he was. So yeah, I can see why the guilt weighs heavy on him, because if he had been there, probably a different outcome would have occurred because he's so skilled. And I do very much like the dynamic between Szeth and Dalinar, and they are tied by guilt, they're tied by duty, but they are not tied by a need to play fair with each other especially. It's more just by their promise to each other about Elhokhar, I think his name is, the son of the previous king, to look after him. And I think that we're going to get more information come out about, the assassination of Gavilar. Of course, not only the motives, but like the how it went down, and there's going to be a lot of juicy secrets involved in that. I think the person with like the white mark on their cheek, I think it was, who was whispering away, and they were with another person speaking to one of the princes. I can't remember who it was, but that's going to be important, and there's so much for us still to get from that section there. I don't have any major guesses, but I already hope that Szeth or Dalinar isn't a traitor, because the betrayal that would be felt from the other one, and the anger and fury that will be rained down from Dalinar if Sadeas was in fact a traitor and it was him who made that happen. Man, it would be something to behold, but we'll see. I don't know. That's definitely not a prediction, because I think, I don't think he would have tied himself so wholly to the new king if he was partly responsible for the death of the previous one, but you never know. So Elhokhar is kind of the linchpin right now. Didn't particularly like him. He seemed reckless. He seemed a little bit privileged and entitled, and I don't think he's going to be the king for very long. I think his death will ensue a bitter rivalry between Sadeas and Dalinar, or maybe Dalinar's sons and Sadeas. But I'm pretty certain that Sadeas is going to be quite important throughout, because of the relationship that's been built up already and shown between him and Dalinar, and then also a little bit of the friction, is probably a nice way to say it, between him and the two sons of Dalinar as well. And we get the mighty Chasm Fiend, and the Chasm Fiend is obviously what we must have seen when Kaladin was running with his bridge team. They managed to get there first, or I don't know actually, I don't know if they did get there first or second, but they managed to get there and they saw the Chasm Fiend slaughtered for the resources inside. And what a cool concept the Chasm Fiend is. It is the resource that allows soulcasters to draw supply lines and other things that are needed for an army logistically to succeed. So yeah, these are so important to the war, and the racing to them is key. And I have a lot to say about Kaladin and his bridge team and what we've seen so far and how it's going to worm its way into the rest of the story, but we'll get there when we get there. But the Chasm Fiend, I noticed a couple of things. The first thing I noticed was it was very clearly said that there were 4 screams that came from it. So does that mean it's made up of 4 different things, or what is the relevance of that 4 screams? Because it's such a strange way to describe a scream, that there was 4 screams. So I predict that that's going to be really important. And also, when it dies, there's an unknown type of spren that leaves it, and that is clearly very important as well. An unknown type of spren inside of the Chasm Fiend, a Chasm Fiend which has the most valuable resource that we found so far inside of it. So how does the spren link up with this, with the gems and the resources and the energy that comes from it? Yeah, I can't pull the strings together. Obviously, I don't have enough information, but those are some vital ingredients to the cake that is this series. And then we get the Wit, and I may be going out on a limb here, but the Wit arrives, only been there for a couple of months. He is confident, he is silver-tongued, he has wormed his way in with those who are important and will shape the future of things. And I immediately think that this is Hoid. I don't think I noticed the white hair, but it just seemed so perfectly in keeping, because in Warbreaker, Hoid knew a bit about everything and did a lot of educating and explaining to one of our main characters. And here, once again, he seems to arrive in these kind of guiding roles in ways, so he has ways to influence the people around him. So if this isn't Hoid, I don't have another guess for Hoid, so this is my guess for Hoid. Like I said, I don't think he had white hair, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just another character that's very influential, but if I had to go out on a limb, I would guess immediately this is Hoid. He just fit the bill perfectly, and I was already looking for him based on the first interlude that we got here, so I think it's you, Hoid. I also want to talk about the Headnotes, and I am cheating ever so slightly here, because technically what I'm about to talk about is on chapter 18, and I literally just read the front of it as I started this video, but I'll explain. So the Headnotes, I think it's one shard talking to another shard. It refers a lot to somebody who can't die, and I believe the shards can't die unless killed by somebody else, maybe. Well, that's how it seemed with Ruin and Preservation anyway. And it also mentions to the Cosmere as a whole, and they know about the size of things, and probably about the one being that was split into 16. And let me read you what I'm about to read. So chapter 18, like I said, I just read the head note at the top. Ati was once a kind and generous man, and you saw what became of him. Ati was Ruin, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me. And that would match up, because apparently he was a kind and generous man, but then he became Ruin, unless I'm remembering it wrong and it became Preservation. But it would be more it would make more sense that he was Ruin based on what was just said there. Race, Rayse, on the other hand, was among the most loathsome, crafty, and dangerous individuals I had ever met. So I think this is one of the shards, or maybe Hoid. Is Hoid a shard? I don't know. Talking about the shards or shard that is involved in this world, which is interesting. Don't have any predictions based on it other than that is what I think is going on. So that utterly massive piece of crucial information aside, let's talk about Kaladin. Kaladin is already earning respect in what he's doing, and I have to say, I really like Kaladin. I like Kaladin more than I like Kelsier when Kelsier has a crowd. When Kelsier doesn't have a crowd, he's much more bearable, and it'll be a closer call. I like Kaladin much more than I like Vin. Vin was okay. She never really captured me as a character. The main characters in Warbreaker were very cool, and I had a lot of fun with them. But I don't think we're going to have as much focus on them or for as long a period of time as we do with Kaladin here. So I think this guy is set up to be one of my favorite characters, period. So just a little props to Kaladin so far. And I think I see a clear way for our main characters to collide. So Kaladin is, as far as I'm aware, in Sadeas' army, because Sadeas uses the bridge teams in a reckless manner to make sure that he makes it to the Chasm Fiends fastest, and he doesn't care how many people die in the bridge teams. Dalinar is a man of the codes. I don't know if it's the codes or I can't remember what it's called, but he follows the code, right? And he believes that, he shouldn't be recklessly killing his men. Now, Kaladin is going to try and not lose another man on his bridge team. So that would make sense that somehow Dalinar catches wind of this one guy who's keeping his whole bridge team alive, and he recruits him to his team so that he can have quick moving bridges without people dying. So yeah, I could see those two, crossing paths that way. And then Yasna, again, if I'm not mistaken, and it's relatively complicated so far, Yasna is the brother of the king. So Shalorn is now with Yasna. So that's how, and obviously at some point, surely Yasna is going to link back up with her brother. I know she's, is she banished? I don't think she's banished. She's a heretic, they said, but something like that. So I don't think it's going to come immediately, but that's how they connect into the story together, is through that siblingness. And then Szeth could arrive in any way because he's just wandering with some warriors right now. But I mean, regardless, his story is just open, and he's a wanderer, and therefore he will link up with them somehow. But I would very much hope that Szeth links up with Kaladin, because it's clear that Kaladin can absorb or use the energy in the same way that Szeth can. And we have a few different clues to this. It becomes clear that he obviously drained the coins that Gaz gave him, because there's no other explanation for that. Also, in the flashback, we get his brother giving him like rocks. It would seem like charged rocks. And then he would get like a spurt of energy and a spurt of, motivation or whatever, like after touching them, and he doesn't know why. And it's just clear that he actually has the ability that Szeth has. So what I would like to happen is Szeth links up with him. Szeth has this weird thing. Szeth's like a Parshman, I believe. I might be wrong. But anyway, he seems very subservient, and he doesn't think much of himself, and he's happy just being a servant of other people. So if he eventually becomes a servant of Kaladin, Kaladin could instruct Szeth to instruct him how to utilize these powers that he has, and therefore he would become what we think he can become, which is extremely influential in this world. And other things we get from the flashback is that I mean, Kaladin is almost definitely going to get a shard blade. You can feel it, and he's probably going to get it from one of the, steal it or take it from one of these characters that we are with on this battlefield. Who would my guess be? Maybe he gets the kings when the king dies, Elhokhar. Or maybe he picks up Dalinar's, but I would hope that Dalinar makes it at least to the end of this story. And I feel like he's going to get his shard blade sooner. There's a lot of options. In the flashback, we also get a mention about the origin of the storms. Obviously, that's going to be important. And he kind of questions whether anyone has ever sailed to the origin of the storms, Or maybe it's the girl who says to him, no one's ever come back from sailing to the origins of the storms. So hopefully at some point in this series, somebody sails to the origins of the storms. That would be sick. But yeah, what is the origin of the storm? Why are they sent? Well, the storm is obviously energy. It's there to charge. So I don't know if it's there to charge, but it does charge up things. So there must just be an extremely powerful source. And I know they're going to send like an Everstorm. So potentially whatever's sending the storms is a shard, or is, I mean, they seem to be obviously extremely powerful sources, or power sources. So potentially whatever's sending the storm is a shard, maybe. And maybe the only way to stop the Everstorm is to go and stop the shard. I don't know, I'm spitballing here, but it's not a terrible guess. My last question is, so Kaladin is a deserter. I don't know what he could have deserted. So he's in one of the Alethi like border dispute armies, but then he's captured as a deserter. So he must have deserted. He must have deserted the other Alethi things, or maybe we find out that he's meant to be sent to become a surgeon. Maybe he does get sent there, and then after the death of his brother and dad, because it says they do die, maybe he deserts his training, or maybe he deserts his post as a surgeon to go and fight, because he feels that, you know, when he first picks up that staff to fight that boy, he feels like that's his calling and he can change things faster. So maybe he either deserted his surgeon school or he deserted his surgeon's post in one army to go and be able to go and fight in another. That would be my guess and prediction for that one. So now we have the extra bits. And the first thing is obviously Syl, the wind spren. The spren are interesting. I'm starting to theorize that, you know, the storms are coming from a power source, and wind is an extremely important part of a storm. And Syl is becoming conscious around Kaladin. Kaladin had the wind like kind of appear around him in the initial flashback. It's all kind of leading towards something, but I don't really know what. But yeah, I just don't know why her becoming conscious is important. Maybe she's like the source of Kaladin's power. Maybe the spren are another source of power. So obviously the storm charges the coins, but maybe the spren, I don't know. I was just kind of hoping a guess would come as I talk enough about it. The resources we seem to find are like, obviously the Chasm Fiend gives off these gems, and these gems are full of power. So yeah, so would the storms charge up the gem inside of a Chasm Fiend, or would it be those weird spren inside of the Chasm Fiend that charge it up? Maybe there's two sources of power, and one is spren and one is storm, because there's two shards normally anyway. Well, one time there was in Mistborn. It's all a bit confusing, but I'm definitely onto something. The next thing we get is we get a very confused Parshendi when they're trying to kill Kaladin and no arrows hit him. I think probably the wind thing maybe appeared around him again and it like bounced him out, and the Parshendi know a lot more about it. They know a lot more about it than maybe the Alethi do, or at least than Kaladin does. Maybe they can see the spren, or maybe they understand the relationship of the spren and they see Syl and how something bounced off. Or maybe I'm just massively reading into it and they were just confused because nobody died and they fired arrows at them. But the Parshendi are obviously going to be really important because that's who ordered the murder of Gavilar. Or that's who we think ordered the murder from Gavilar, but it's, you know, pretty apparent that it probably wasn't. So there's more to read into that. And we also get a live prophecy of somebody dying on the battlefield. And I really don't know what those are, but it still seems to be people pointing towards the Everstorm and the fact that it's coming. So I think Davilar's need to unite them and bring them together. Like that's gonna be the overarching theme, I believe, of at least this book, but the entirety of the series. We need to unite. The Everstorm is coming. We must defeat it. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of video. There's a bunch on my channel. I really enjoy making them. Come along with me, hit subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you so much.